Hey y'all, welcome to No Filters. I'm Rhonda, warts and all. Today I was so lucky. I had lunch with some of my aunts and uncles. We come from a pretty large family, and so there's lots of us. And they were in town going to Sam's. They live in Independence County, which is the most beautiful place. But they came to town, and we all met for lunch. And it reminded me of how many roots I have and how fortunate I am to be the oldest of the oldest of the oldest. When I was born, I had 11 blood grandparents, the tiers of grandparents. 11. I had my grandmother and my granddad on my daddy's side. I had my mama and my papa on my mama's side. I had my great-grandmother and great-granddad Shields on my mother's side. I had my ma and pa Fuller on my mother's side. I also had my great-grandpa John on my father's side, and my great-grandmother Lewis on my father's mother's side. And I had one great, and I cannot remember which side that was on. And I wish my late mother was here, because that woman had a mind like a steel trap, and she'd know. But anyway, I don't remember the great grandmother, I think. She died not too long after I was born, or he did. I'm not even sure. Anyway, but the 10 that were left stayed until junior high. Honestly, I learned so much from these people. Things that I would never have learned, even though you study World War I, you study the Great Depression, you study, all these things in school, but I heard the stories at their knees. And my Ma Fuller could peel an apple, just peel it, and it would be all one piece, and she wouldn't even look at the apple. She'd be busy hollering at kids and yelling, "Don't slam the door," and getting the dog off something. All of my grandmothers were, and greats, were amazing cooks. My great-grandmother Lewis had palsy, Parkinson's, I imagine, or something like that, and she shook. She shook all the time. And I remember when we would have dinner, and she'd sit at the table and rest her wrist on the table, and the table would shake. And we just got the biggest kick out of that. We thought that was cool. But she told me about, the first time she got roses, and just, they were seamstresses. And, my great-granddad Shields told me about the Great War. And, my great-grandmother and great-grandfather Shields came over as children from Ireland. So, I got to hear these stories, and the value of that is just incalculable. My kids, because I was so much older when I had my kids, they were down to just the 4 grandparents. And I think my mama and papa were still around, but they died when Samuel was a baby. So they didn't get the benefit of knowing anything beyond their grandparents. And another story for another time, but they weren't the best grandparents in the world. I'm going to go ahead and say that. My grandparents were born to be grandparents. My grandmother was always baking something. One of my cousins and I got in so much trouble one time because we were doing gymnastics in the den, and grandmother had a bowl of dough rising by the fireplace, and we might have come in contact with that bowl. The cinnamon rolls were very flat that day, and we got in a heap side of trouble. Even though the dough fell, she still had to make them, because you don't waste good dough. So we loved them anyway. We didn't care. And she would make this thing called chocolate. It was not a gravy. It did not have flour in it. It was cocoa, sugar, and butter, or milk. And then we put butter all in it because it just wasn't rich enough. and we ate it with biscuits, and that was the biggest treat. My mother was an excellent cook, and she tried to make chocolate at our house, and I'm sure it probably tasted exactly the same, but it just wasn't the same. When grandmother made it, it was the best. I am just so fortunate to have had those people in my life, and my aunts and uncles that came today to lunch. I mean, the uncle that was with us, he and I are two peas in a pod. We grew up with chronic illness, and we're ornery and sarcastic and sassy, and he's the one that used to throw rocks at me when I was little. Run, Rhonda. He was only 13, 14 when I was born, so and he shared the story again today, and I remember my mother telling me that he was with my mother. They were driving from Independence County back here the day John F. Kennedy died, November 22nd, 1963. I was 4 months old, just laying on the seat between them because that was safe, right? Oh my goodness. I'm the luckiest in so many ways. I wish I'd written down all the stories. My grandmother did write a lot of her stories down, and she has a cookbook. Oh, it's wonderful. Of course, if you remember my gravy post, her hand and my hand, when it comes to a handful of flour, are not the same. So I have to, amend a little bit when I look at her cookbook. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. I think having that heritage right there with me, in front of me, was so amazing. And I'm hoping that, I can pass that on if I ever do have, grandchildren. I have grand dogs and a grand cat. We babysat the grand dogs this weekend, and that was fun. Anyway, I just thought I'd share. Love your grandmamas and your granddaddies. If you like my content, please like, share, follow, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.